the Nevertron movie. I'll break it down into a couple of different. Syria, Lagos has become one of the largest exporters of illegal ivory in the world.
Live in a third world nation where your votes will get stolen if you can vote there at all.
Welcome to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters. It is always a great pleasure to be here. So let's just talk about some of the highlights. The World Cup's over. Sadly, my pick, Portugal, got beat a long time ago. Spain and Argentina. I was actually rooting for Spain, so I actually, that worked out well. It was interesting to watch the first halftime show. I don't think football/soccer should have halftime shows. It just doesn't really go with the games. Just leave that for American football. So we'll see what happens in the next 4 years. What else is happening on the world stage? In Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, the president, has decided he's going to ban elections. He's just going to stay in office forever. He just thinks elections would allow the great evil of America to come into his country. So, hey, I guess maybe that's the new trend growing around the world. Just decide not to have elections. We have what's going on in Iran, of course, with the United States. We're going to talk about that with our second guest. And what else do we want to talk about this morning? I think that one of the other issues I want to talk about is it's a growing issue in the United States. It's going to be a power, when Benjamin Netanyahu comes to the United States for the UN Assembly, the mayor of New York, Mondami, has said he's going to arrest Netanyahu on war crimes. And yet Trump has now says that no, under no circumstances will Netanyahu be arrested. So we'll see how that power play works itself out in the Big Apple, as they say. So, what's going on in America, I just don't ever know. Anyway, let's take a quick break from Around the World with Dane Waters, and we'll be back with our first guest. Thank you. It's just there I am. Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. As usual, not paying attention to what I'm doing here. No wonder my producer really gets onto me all the time. Anyway, I'm very pleased and honored to have Pierre Le Goff. Am I saying that right, Pierre?
You did, yeah. It's correct,
Okay.
Pierre Le Goff.
So you're my second Frenchman I've had on my show, and I have to tell you, both Frenchmen are very good looking. I tell you, that's why I don't ever go to France, because I can't ever find a woman there. No doubt about that. So let's talk about. Well, first of all, tell us about you. Tell us about your background.
Sure. So I'm French. I'm actually French American and naturalized a few years back. And originally a French diplomat. First part of my career, spent 10 years working in Paris, foreign affairs, Middle East security issues. Joined the European Union, the External Action Service, in 2018 for a tour in Jerusalem. So if you do want to talk about Netanyahu being in the US and what's happening there, I have a take on that. And now I'm trying to, I want to say advise people, because I wouldn't know how to do that, but give my take on things when people ask. So that's what private sector does, right? After 15 years in government, I don't even know, but to do. So I try to do that the best I can now.
Well, listen, you're going to advise us, so we're going to put those skills to work. Oh, well, okay. Our topic today is supposed to be the far right, but I do want to ask you, since you bring up about Netanyahu, what do you think about that possibility of him being arrested when he comes to the General Assembly?
So I think legally it's a very there's a very narrow path to arrest someone that is in the US on a diplomatic visa for the UN General Assembly. As you know, they have a very specific type of visa that's granted to people to come to the UN and address the United Nations. And technically, it means that people are not necessarily on US soil, according to the agreement between the UN and the US. So I think President Trump on this one has the easy way to prevent Mamdani from doing anything with the New York City police. That being said, you can always arrest someone and then litigate and say, okay, it's my bad. It was actually a mistake. We should have done that because according to your status in the United States, you can be prosecuted. But he could be arrested and not prosecuted, which would be a first, and which would be a very interesting turn of events. So I'm with you on that. I'm interested to see how Mamdani is willing to push it, knowing that he cannot prosecute, but that he can, of course, use NYPD to impede a bit, at least Bibi's motorcade, which would be, again, a first in New York.
Yeah, well, I hate to see, sadly, I can't imagine Netanyahu's security just saying, "Oh, yep, take Bibi, just take him to jail." We're not going to do anything about it. So, listen, hopefully, well, anything's possible in the Big Apple. So, I don't know. We'll have to see how that goes. But let's get down to our.
I'm assuming that federal service would be like, usually when Bibi comes, he also comes with, of course, his private security and personal security and the Israelis here, but the U.S. federal service also provides security for him. So. It would be also interesting to see how it plays out between the federal and the state and city level. So yeah, tons of interesting. I'm sure people are looking into that right now, which keeps them busy over the summer, which is good.
Yeah, well, we'll have to. Okay, let's talk about the far right. What's going on? You're as a Frenchman, I guess Marie Le Pen, and so first of all, let's talk about the terminology. When we talk about the far right, what would be your definition of the far right?
So that's a very interesting question, because I think it's the fundamental starting point of where all the other parties got it wrong. Because far right for a long time was something that was out of the political realm for them, for the left and the right, for what we call the traditional parties. It was something that was toxic, something they didn't want to address even, didn't want to confront or debate with people from the far right on a political aspect, on platform, on ideas. They were just saying they are far right, so whatever they say is wrong, and whoever is supporting them is doing that out of protest. Cannot be that they agree with them. And we saw this semantic moves, right, shift now, because I don't think that worked. The strategy of demonizing the far right as something outside of the traditional political spectrum worked. People were the disbelief and the lack of trust that grew between the general public and the traditional parties benefited the far right, and now they are a force that cannot be ignored anymore. It cannot be just labeled as a protest vote. And so now you've seen that in France, you've seen that, of course, in Italy, in Germany, Austria. The far right is an integral part of and even the media, when they talk about it, they mention the far right as a normal political group now in the assembly in France, for example. Not only because it's a big one, but also because they were reintegrated because of their resurgence. Far right is not new, right? In Europe, it's been here for, especially in France, been here for over a century. Of course, we had some spikes in their overall influence of the French politics, but it is clear that in the past 10 years, 15 years, well, since 2000, well, I guess 2002 in France, but mostly in the past 15 years, they've been growing a lot. And far right now just means pretty much what was the conservative movement before is now genuinely considered probably centrist. And far right is now, so you have the far right party. You talk about Le Pen, right? So Rassemblement National, which is the party, is not considered the right almost for a lot of people and a lot of commentators in France. And what is the far right is now, what was the far right is now, you put extreme on there. So you don't say far right, you see extreme right or populist right. When you talk about the movement that still exists that are in the fringes of this political spectrum. But I think that the general cursor shifted from to the right in general in European politics. And what used to be in the margin, the far right used to be in the margin, is now pretty much at, I wouldn't say center right, but pretty much on the traditional right of the political spectrum.
Well, I'm glad I asked that question because it is complicated. Because here in the UK, where I am, people called the Reform Nigel Farage party the far right, and and it seems like any party that basically believes in anti-immigration. I'm just generalizing here. Anti-immigration, pro-nationalism. Like in the United States, the white boys and some people, call them the far right. And anybody who supports, what the Nazis supported, they call that far right. So, but some of those parts, like for example, Nigel Farage, they're becoming mainstream now. So, let me ask this question. Do you think that the far right should be feared? Or do you think that it is not as concerning as it used to be?
So I think again, and we come back to that, I think there's an issue with the label here.
Yeah.
If you ask me, I think Nigel Farage and the Reform Party for the UK probably should be feared, but not necessarily for the reason you would think. I don't think they are, they haven't been in power. And we've seen that with Trump 1. We've seen that with Trump 2 in the US. When you have a party that is building its rhetoric on some very, very narrow issues, very important probably to certain people like immigration, but they're focusing on that. And they don't develop a real economic program, economic platform. They don't develop relations with the neighbors, which for the UK is incredibly important, especially now that the UK is not part of the EU. You need to have incredible diplomacy to build trade partnerships with the US, Europe, and outside. If you don't do that, and I'm probably mistaken, but I don't think Reform has done that in the past, or I've proved that it were actively doing so. When you arrive in power, you are effectively in waiting mode because you need to build that once you arrive in power, and the word keeps on going without you. So I think it should be feared just for, if just that, just for the economic reason. And the same goes for France. You've noticed that in most of the far-right parties in Europe, they now came back from their anti-Europe. They are anti-Europe because they're not nationalists, right? But they're not anti-European Union anymore as much as they were. So the Frexit movement in France is now very marginal. And Rassemblement National and Front National before them, they're really anti-Europe, anti-European Union. They fought that hard for years. And now they're okay with it because they realize that they need to provide, they need to succeed economically. But the thing is, within their party, within their mindset, it's still a nationalist party. So how do you reconcile this need to have an integrated European economic policy and platform, because this is how countries like France or the UK survive in the nowadays economy, ours. How do you reconcile that with a nationalist rhetoric? And I don't think the far right has done that yet. I don't think they reconcile their inner party nationalist movement and base with the necessity to have, a free market economy and trade with partners and with strong economic, political, even military relations with allies and partners. And I think that's a real danger, because when they arrive in power, you see this divide within the party taking shape, and they can't govern properly. So even not talking about what they will do, how they will do it is to me a big issue. And we've seen that in the US. The US is a sandbox for what's to come in the EU, sadly, if we don't do anything about it. And well, arguably, economically, the Trump administration right now is not incredibly successful.
Let me ask you, do you think that Trump's views on the EU and how he has treated the EU, has that forced European Union members more cohesion among Europeans, or is it making the European Union stronger because of Trump?
It's a wake-up call that everyone is using this phrase, but I think it's true. It's a wake-up call that the EU needs to take care of itself and needs to be more coherent, needs to have better processes to decide on where it wants to go. But overall, it's detrimental to the EU, because the EU-US partnership is essential to the EU. It's essential because I still think we do, but we share values that we try to defend together. And also we share a lot of trade, and we share a lot of back and forth between the commercial routes between the US and the EU is vital to the economy of both the US and EU. So yes, it could be in the short term that it will reinforce a bit the cohesion amongst the EU member states, but overall it's very detrimental, because we need a strong transatlantic partnership to thrive and to face the real competition that is China, not only for commercial ideas and commercial development in Europe, but also for all our interest and all the commercial and economic partnership we built over years with the rest of the world.
Well, so let's go back to extremism. Okay, we talk about the far right. Let's talk about extremism, because you're right. I mean, terminology is. I mean, listen, we deal with these terms like populism and nationalism and far right, but let's just kind of boil it down to extremism. I think we all can agree on what extremism is. But is extremism growing in the European Union?
I believe so. I believe so, and on both sides of the spectrum, sadly. So extremism on the right and the left. I'm not going to enter that, who started to be more extreme first. But obviously, the extreme right will fuel the entire right sentiment and the extreme left, and vice versa. And again, we've seen that in the US with a very, very polarized society. And you wake up all of a sudden and you have an incredibly polarized society, and it feels like it's irreconcilable. Well, we're not there yet in the EU. I don't think so in Europe. But there is a growing extremism that, to me, is linked to the failure of traditional parties. And that's what it alluded to initially, is that I think traditional parties tried to label the extremists, and you talk about the far right, for example, as it was a scarecrow for them to make sure that they would be reelected, and see, it's impossible to vote for them because they have so they would construct the program and try to try to prove before the election how it would be terrible to have a far right government for the people. And people mostly, and France, for example, believed in that. And that's why you had the vote to Macron, for example, in 2017 and 2022, because people don't want a far right government. People don't want an extreme because people believe the argument, but soundly. The only issue is all these traditional parties campaign against, and it's been a while since they campaigned for something. And once they arrive in power, well, they campaign against something, but they don't necessarily have a program that will actually address the root causes of the far right resurgence. Will it be insecurity? Will it be some perception of immigration? Would it be employment, economy, etc.? And that is an issue, because then when you elect someone who is telling you vote for me because the other one is terrible, but then you don't have your issues addressed in the 5 years that the president is in power, well, then it's like, okay, well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should vote for the other guys. Maybe I did wrong. And I think that started again in the 90s in France, and you see that growing. And in every election, they are climbing because of that, because people start to be the lack of trust in the traditional political class, the elite, is growing. So I don't know if that's extremism, but that's growing. And populism is definitely growing, meaning that it is very easy to, in a 2-minute clip on social media, to convince someone that the president, the government, is doing something wrong. And then it's a lot harder to convince otherwise. And traditional political parties don't really campaign anymore as they used to, don't really take the time to explain and to convince, because again, they think that they can only campaign for the last 2 weeks and it can win the last debate against and it'll be it. They will campaign against and it'll be done. So that's a very big issue. And I think that's what is fueling the populism. And as we've seen in the US, I was seeing in France, as we've seen in Italy, and in the UK, populism leads to extremism. So that's, to me, the biggest link here.
I agree. So based on, since Macron can't run for re-election, do you think there's a chance that like Le Pen could being president? I know there's some legal issues associated with her running, but outside of that,
yes, absolutely. And I would say right now she's the best position to be the next president. And I don't think it is. It's not only her doing. She's doing great in campaigning. She restricted her party in a way that is appealing to people. The messaging is now tuned down a lot compared to what her father used to do, and compared to the early years of when she took over. And I think that's what people want, and a lot of people will actually vote for her and not against the system or against. They would vote for her. But I do think it's also the election is also for the other political parties to lose, because should they, there is space for especially center right, but also center left, and we have example in the in France, we have examples of the concentration in the center of forces coming together to try to have a kind of a center right platform, usually, because in your center, you're usually center right and center left. But I think there is space for that. The only issue is you will have 7 to 8 candidates, because no one seems to agree who should be the candidate, and everybody thinks that it could be that they are the next Macron. Sadly, they can only be one, and I don't see any signs, especially in the left, of them unite. And if they don't do that, of course, they will not be able to challenge Le Pen. And that is to be feared, because you mentioned, we're not, we've seen what's going on in the US. The trend is clear. Biden campaigned on the end of democracy if Trump would be elected. And I think there was a mistake to put that harshly, because he was disconnected to everyday concerns for people. but he's not completely wrong in the sense that we've seen the attack on the judiciary, we've seen the attacks on the university and research, we've seen the attack on the CDC, on NOAA, on all these what provides data for the government to run. And I think this playbook will probably be the exact same that Marine Le Pen will use, trying to make sure that, yes, election will happen next time. Well, not in Nicaragua, but when election happens, the press will not necessarily be as free as it used to be. The judiciary can not necessarily do the same job as it used to be. And all the guardrails that guarantee the free and fair election will probably be dismantled, legally dismantled, which is a very, very scary thing. So to come back to the initial question, should we fear the far right? I think we should, because if they're using the US playbook, we're in big trouble.
Well, no, I agree, and I think that what's historically, I mean, you and I both do political stuff, and what I see is that when times are tough economically for the people, they're less likely to care about fundamental things like freedom and democracy, because they want to put food on their tables and a roof over their heads and to educate their kids, and so I think that is one of the reasons Donald Trump got elected, and I think you're spot on about Biden talk about Trump winning would be an assault to democracy. Average people says, okay, well, fine, that's great, but I need to make sure that I can feed my kids. So that was the issue there. Listen, Pierre, sadly we're out of time. We could talk a long time about this stuff because with America, to me, with America, abandoning their responsibilities globally, I think the European Union needs to take a greater role. And Macron leaving, I think, will be, it depends on who takes over, but I don't know. He's a very critical player in what happens around the world. So anyway, I'm sorry to keep going on about that, but the European perspective, I think the whole world needs to pay attention to. So listen, Pierre, thank you. You got 30 seconds for any parting words.
Yeah, I mean, 30 seconds. I guess the easy topic is Iran, right? Now again, hopefully, and that comes back to what you said, because what's happening in Iran now, I think, will affect not only the midterms in the US, not only but will affect a lot of elections coming forward, because it's affecting the world economy, it's affecting the world's system of international regulations, and I think this is a key moment in the world history right now, and will again affect elections in the US and Europe next year, and let's see how.
Well, listen, Pierre, I appreciate your time and your perspective, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Dane.
Thanks for being with Dane Waters. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with our next guest. Thanks.